Your sleep style can be assessed by going to their website. You take a brief 2-minute questionnaire quiz, ask you questions like, do you sleep on your back or your side or your stomach? Maybe you don't know, or maybe you move around a lot during the night. It also asks you questions such as, do you tend to run hot or wake up cold? Things of that sort. And then they tailor a particular mattress to your sleep needs. For me, I match to the so-called Dusk DUSK mattress, and I love it. I sleep better than ever. And right now, if you want to try Helix Sleep, you can go to helixsleep.com/Huberman. And if you do that, you'll get $200 off your order plus 2 free pillows. They also have a great warranty. They have a 10-year warranty on their mattresses. If you don't like the mattress for any reason, they'll pick it up for free from your home. And they just make the whole thing really easy to try and determine whether or not it's right for you. So again, it's helixsleep.com/Huberman to get $200 off and 2 free pillows on your first order. Some of you have asked how you can help support the podcast in yet other ways besides just checking out our sponsors. We really appreciate the question, and we've set up a Patreon account at patreon.com/Andrew Huberman, which allows you to donate to the podcast at a variety of different levels. We have, for instance, the 5-HTP, which is in honor of serotonin. 5-HTP is the name for serotonin. That allows you to donate $5 per month. We have the Circadian, which, as many of you, of course, will know, is 24-hour day. So you can donate $24 a month if you like. You can also pick any value that you want. We even have the Costello, which is $10 a month, which allows you to support the podcast in honor of Costello, the fact that he's 10 years old, that he eats 10 pounds of food a day, and the fact that he takes 10 one-hour naps per day on average. So again, that's patreon.com/Andrew Huberman if you'd like to support the podcast that way. Today's episode is going to be all about the science of emotions. The first month of the podcast, we talked about sleep and wakefulness. Last month, we were talking about neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change in response to experience. And this month, we're going to talk about these things that we call emotions. We're going to decipher what they are, how they work, how we can control them, when we might not want to control them. There are going to be 4 episodes on emotions, and today we're going to talk in particular about something that most often is called stress. You might be thinking, wait, stress isn't an emotion, but stress really lies at the heart of whether or not our internal experience is matched well or not to our external experience or the events that are happening to us and around us. And as you'll soon see, those converge or combine to create what we call emotions. Now, I want to be very clear that we're going to talk about the biology of emotions. We're going to talk a little bit about some psychological concepts related to emotion. And we are definitely going to talk about tools to control what we call stress, or commonly think of as stress. We're also going to clean up some common myths about stress. For instance, that stress impairs your immune system.
Not right now.
In certain contexts. And in other contexts, stress actually enhances your immune system and makes it function better. There is going to be a lot of discussion about whether or not our internal state, whether or not we are alert or calm, is good or bad depending on the circumstances. So where we're headed here is I'd like you to come away from today's episode with what I call an organizational logic, a framework for thinking about these things that typically we just call happy or sad or depressed or anxious. And I'm going to make sure that you have tools that are grounded in physiology and neuroscience that will allow you to navigate this otherwise complex space that we call emotions, that will allow you to ground yourself better when you're feeling like life is weighing on you or you're being pulled by the currents of life, as well as to support other people, whether or not that's in a psychological practice, if you're a practitioner, or you have clients or children or spouses, really to be able to support other people in your environment better. And the tools that I'm going to focus on today range from behavioral tools. We will talk about some of the more valuable supplementation tools that are out there. And we're going to talk a little bit about things like depression, PTSD, but we will be devoting entire episodes to things like depression, PTSD, and even attention deficit and obsessive compulsive disorder, which, believe it or not, well, this might not surprise many of you, have a very strong emotional component. It's just not just about compulsive behaviors and intrusive thoughts. It's also about the emotional load of being in that state. So I promise that today we're going to clean up a lot of misunderstanding. We're going to give you a lot of tools, and you're going to learn a lot about the biology of how your body and brain work together. Because if ever there was a topic that brought together the brain and body or mind-body relationship, it's stress and emotions. It's also the positive emotions. When we feel something,
not right now,
we're super happy, or just
go to the toilet,
or we are
playing a game,
stressed, anxious, and overwhelmed. It isn't just in our head, it's also in our body. And as you may recall, the nervous system, which includes the brain and the eyes and the spinal cord, but also all the connections with the organs of the body, includes the brain and body. And those organs of the body, your gut and your liver and your spleen, they are also communicating with the brain. So I look forward to a day, in fact, when we no longer think about neuroscience as just the brain. Many neuroscientists now also think about the body, of course. The brain controls the body, but the body is also having a very profound and concrete influence on the brain. I think up until recently, people would hear about kind of brain body and always think about mindfulness. We're actually not going to talk that much about mindfulness at all today. Mindfulness is kind of a vague concept, in fact. When you think about mindfulness, it's good to take the opposite. What's the opposite of mindfulness? Would be mindlessness. Well, all of a sudden we're into territory that isn't really easy for one person to describe their experience or to help others with their experience. Today we're going to talk about objective tools that match the brain-body experience or separate the brain-body experience in ways that leverage your ability to lean into life better, to feel better, literally to just feel better about what you're experiencing, and believe it or not, to be able to control your emotions when that's appropriate. This isn't about becoming robotic. This isn't about trying not to feel human. This is actually about being able to lean into life better as a consequence of being able to control some of your inner real estate, this nervous system that includes the brain and body, and how that nervous system is interacting with the outside world. So it's to place you in a greater position of power. And so let's get started in deciphering what is stress, what are emotions, and why did I batch stress and emotions into one discussion today. Okay, so what is stress? We hear all the time that stress is bad. We hear people saying they're really stressed out. What is stress? You all presumably heard the arguments or the framework that stress is this horrible ancient carryover from times in which humans were pursued by animals or other human predators, and that whenever we feel what we call stress, or feel stressed out, that it's just this unfortunate invasion of something that we no longer need in modern life, that this was designed for when we were being attacked by bears or tigers or lions or whatever it is. And gosh, what an unfortunate thing. And we have so many creature comforts nowadays, but we have not eliminated this stress, almost as if it was like an organ or a system in our body that was bad for us, that we're stuck with just because of the species that we are. First of all species experience stress. And I think that it's fair to say, even though I wasn't there, that yes, in fact, throughout our evolutionary history, we were vulnerable to animal attack and other human attacks on a regular basis, up until points where we started developing weapons and structures and fire and other things that allow us to protect ourselves better from those animals and invaders of various kinds. But it is entirely naive for us to think that in ancient times being kind of a loose term for previous time, medieval times, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, of course, there were infidelities, right? Partners cheated. People died. In fact, before the advent of phones, which we're going to talk about today, you can imagine that someone might head off on a hunt or to go visit a relative and never come back, and you would never know why. That would be very stressful. So there was psychosocial stress. There was the stress of losing loved ones. There was the stress of cold, of famine. There was the stress probably also of just worry. This idea that, ancient versions of humans 1,000 years ago, 100 years ago didn't worry, I think that is entirely inconsistent with everything we know about the structure of the human brain 100 years, 1,000 years ago. So all the problems that we're struggling with existed forever. It's just that stress at its core is a generalized system. It wasn't designed for tigers attacking us or people attacking us. It's a system to mobilize other systems in the brain and body. That's what stress really is. It's designed to be generic. And that's the most important thing that I'd like you to understand today, is that the system that governs what we call stress is generic. It wasn't designed for one thing. And that gives it a certain advantage in taking over the state of our brain and body, but it also gives you, all of us, an advantage in controlling it, because it's based on hardwired biological mechanisms. And there are hardwired biological mechanisms, meaning cells and chemicals and pathways and tissues that exist in you right now that require no neuroplasticity, that allow you to put a brake on stress. And so we're going to talk about those. So you have a system for stress and you have a system for de-stress that are baked into you. They were genetically encoded, and you were born with them, and you still have them now. So if you're alive and listening, you have the capacity to control your stress. And today I'm going to talk about ways that you can control your stress, not just by doing some offline practice of meditation or breath work or something like that, but real-time tools that allow you to push back on stress when stress hits in real time. This is something that my lab works actively on, in developing and testing these tools and evolving these tools. And there are other laboratories that do this as well. So let's talk about the stress response. And by doing that, you will understand exactly why the tools I'm going to give you work. For those of you that are saying, wait, I just want the tools, just give me a summary. Trust me, if you understand mechanism, you are going to be in a far better position to incorporate these tools, to teach these tools to others, and to modify them as your life circumstances change. If you'd like the cheat sheet, or you just want the one-page PDF, eventually we'll get that stuff out to people, but it's really important to understand the underlying mechanism. Okay, so what is stress? Well, let's just distinguish between stressors, which are the things that stress us out, and stress, which is the psychological and physiological response to stressors. I'm mainly going to talk about stress, which is your response to things. Let's be clear about what we already know, which is that stressors can be psychological or they can be physical. Okay? If I put you outside on a cold day without a jacket for a very long time, that is stressful. If I have you prepare for too many exams at once and you can't balance it all with your sleep schedule and your other needs for comfort and well-being like food, rest, sleep, and social connection, that is stressful. So stress, and as I mentioned before, is generic. It doesn't distinguish between physical and emotional stress. So what happens when the stress response hits? Let's talk about the immediate, or what we call the acute stress response. We could also think of this as a short-term stress. So you have a collection of neurons. They have a name. It's called the sympathetic chain ganglia, and it has nothing to do with sympathy. Sympa means together, and there's a group of neurons that start right about at your neck and run down to about your navel, a little bit lower, and those are called the sympathetic chain ganglia. You don't need to memorize that name. There will not be a quiz, but it's important to know that in the middle of your body, you have a chain of neurons that when something stresses us out, either in our mind or because something enters our environment and we see something that stresses us out that we don't like, heights if you're afraid of heights, somebody you dislike walks into the room, etc., that chain of neurons becomes activated like a bunch of dominoes falling all at once. It's very fast. When that happens, those neurons release a neuromodulator, neurochemical that I've talked about before on this podcast called acetylcholine. They release that at various sites within the body. Now, this is important because normally acetylcholine would be used to move muscles. Actually, every time we move a muscle, pick up a cup of coffee, write with a pen, walk down the street, it's spinal neurons connected to muscle. So in the brain, it's involved in focus, and in muscles, it's involved in making muscles twitch. But if we were stressed, we wouldn't want all our muscles to contract at once. We would just be kind of like paralyzed like this, in what tonic activation is called. We wouldn't want that. It's something called tetanus, believe it or not, because the tetanus toxin will cause that kind of rigor of the entire body. We do not want that. When those neurons are activated, acetylcholine is released, but there's some other neurons for the aficionados out there. They're called the postganglionic neurons. Those ones respond to that acetylcholine, and then they release epinephrine, which is the equivalent to adrenaline. So we have this system where very fast, whenever we're stressed, the core of our body, these neurons down the middle of our body, release these chemicals, and then there's adrenaline, or epinephrine, released at particular organs and acts in particular ways. We're going down into the weeds here, so just stay with me because it's going to make a lot of sense and you will appreciate having this knowledge in hand. That epinephrine acts in two different ways. Some things like the muscles of your legs and your heart and other things that need to be active when you're stressed, they have a certain kind of receptor, which is called the beta receptor. And that beta receptor responds to epinephrine and blood vessel.
Let me look at Latias. 昨天没玩过 Latias， 我还没跟那个人说我玩 Pokemon Unite。厕所 Latias 没有试过 ，Latios 我有试过。 哇，我这个 teammate 很差劲，可能都是机器呢。Free battles with the role supporter. Mm. 我不知道，你问那个中国人。Win battle with 3 different Pokemon.去先去厕所。